Well, hi everyone. It's so good to be here. I'm Elber Mel, and I'm here with Adam Phillips again with One More Store. Just really happy to introduce our next guest, Taryn Smith. So, Taryn, I guess I just said your name, but I'd love for you to introduce kind of who you are and what kind of business you're in.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. Very excited about this conversation. I'm Taryn Smith. I'm founder and CEO of 37 Oaks, and I'm sure we'll talk quite a bit about it. But in essence, what we're doing is we're creating this ecosystem for small businesses and really helping them grow from kind of like the late startup phase into midterm or late term growth. So excited to talk about all my learnings and insights over the past few decades.
Now,
Thank
Elle, I
you.
know I'm not supposed to break through already, but can I add the word ecosystem? I feel like is such an important word more and more. Can you explain a little bit more what you mean by ecosystem for businesses? Because I feel like it's said a lot, but at the same time, I don't think it's I don't think people always mean the same things. I'd just love to hear you just dig into that just a little bit.
Sure. In a nutshell, I don't also want to use the word one-stop shop because that's not really what it is. But what we're doing is we're seeing the needs of the business owners that we have, and we're trying to create all of the resources, all of the tools, all of the support that they need in order for them to get from late startup into early or midterm growth. So because of the uniqueness, at least the way I look at it, of the businesses that we work with, a lot of these resources aren't either available or it's hard for them to find. So we're trying to consolidate all of them into the space so they don't have to go looking in all these different areas for it.
And can you say a little bit about, because I totally get where you're coming from. I've worked in this space when I worked primarily out of Chicago to nonprofit.
Mhm.
Where are some of the places they're going now? Like, what are you seeing them? How are you seeing them try to solve this problem right now? And Elle, I know we're supposed to get to the questions.
We're just going to go.
Just having a conversation.
Well, there's a few different ways and places that they're going. Of course, YouTube University, right? That's like the main place that everyone goes because there's so much content there. But oftentimes the content may not be relevant to them. Not to digress, but oftentimes what I'll see, especially if you're opening a storefront or e-commerce site, that you'll have people that are like really knowledgeable about a certain aspect of it. So when they're teaching small businesses, it's kind of like over teaching and it's too much information where they get overwhelmed and even more confused, and it puts them down like a bunny trail. So YouTube has a lot of great information on there. So that's one place where they're looking. Of course, social media, and then just Googling. So a lot of this content is out there, but how relevant is it? How digestible is it? How are they able to absorb it? That tends to be the question that is asked.
Yeah, that is that's such an important point. And I think 1 million people, 2 million people are going to resonate with that. If we've reached 2 million, which we will. But I really think the idea that you can find amazing things on YouTube, like you said, but finding actually what you need or really knowing what you need is really the key issue. And we're coming back to a theme, which I think, we all talked about the last time we spoke to, which is just vocabulary. How do you even explain what you need? So
That's
yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest things that I kind of pride 37 Oaks on because we are our customer. So part of my job and everyone else on our team is to take all of these macro insights from these large organizations, from experts in the industry, and really make it digestible. We're translating it into a language that our business owners know. So again, they don't need to overknow certain things right now. They need to know what they need to know in order to get from A to B. But you have to have that translator to that language specifically. And that empathy, I think that's a part of being able to translate it. That's a lot of where we've been focusing over the past 7 years.
That's
No,
great.
and thank you so much. I think one amazing part of this conversation is there's probably going to be a kind of double layer, like a nuance. It's around, I think you're going to talk about your business and what you do to serve entrepreneurs, but then I think you're going to have a rich storytelling bank of anecdotes of the obstacles that your small business owners have faced.
Mhm.
So I am looking forward to kind of like that double observation.
Of course.
So, I think we've touched briefly on some of the starting origin points of 37 Oaks, but would love to hear just about very much the tactical products and services it offers. And my baby is also interested in hearing about the product. offers.
Well, we are glad to tell your baby as well.
Hi,
I
Leo,
know.
small business owner, 2040.
That's-
Absolutely. All
I was gonna
for it.
say, I hope we can talk about the baby. I'm glad you mentioned first. Congratulations. That's very exciting.
Thank you. I have a 2.5-week-old baby below my blurred Zoom screen. So if there's weird burbles. Anyway.
Entrepreneur training. I love it. I love it. Well, the way I describe 37 Oaks is really an education company. That's ultimately what we are. A little bit more specific, we look at ourselves as a commerce development and learning laboratory. So a lot of our education is around commerce for small business. Think about the way the business owners grow. Ones that have tangible products. So they either grow through a storefront, like a physical storefront, they'll grow through wholesale, they'll grow through e-commerce, or they'll grow through pop-ups. And all of those are valid business models for all of the businesses that we work with. So really what we're doing is we are educating them and preparing them for that growth. A lot of the business owners that we work with, they tend to be women-owned businesses, minority-owned businesses from either underfunded, from under-resourced, under everything, everything, like just under everything communities. And oftentimes they have amazing products, like absolutely amazing products, but where they get stuck is when it comes to the growth and the distribution of them. So they get stuck in the startup phase of they have this idea, they're doing a little bit here, maybe on social, a little bit here on some pop-ups, they maybe did a little here, but when it comes to getting over that hump into early growth, that's where they get stuck. So we're designed to unstick them with our education and all of the other resources and tools that we have under our belt.
That's great. And I definitely want to know what inspired you to start, but I also want you to talk a little bit about when you started. Did you see some of those aggregators that are out there? So there are some people trying to do essentially like a mall online, right? For all these e-commerce and, product companies that are out there that you're helping. Did you start to see them, or did you see them early on, and how have you worked with them? But we'll start with what inspired you to start.
So what inspired me to start is I have a corporate retail background. So I spent close to 20 years working at the corporate offices of some of the larger retailers that we all probably shop at today. And I loved it. I was a national buyer. So if you're familiar with that role at all, you know that really what the national buyer is doing is really connecting the customer to the product in a profitable way. So they're dealing with all kinds of brands, the big Kellogg's, Unilevers, down to like the regional and local ones. And one of my biggest frustrations was, we're meeting with all of these business owners and all of these brands, and the smaller business owners, mostly the women-owned, minority-owned, had amazing products. And as a buyer, you are trained to identify the potential in a product quickly. You don't have to go through the full analysis, especially when you've been in it for decades. So I'm seeing these amazing products, but the only reason why they weren't able to grow or get their products on the shelves is because of what I call the retail, the commerce, and the distribution acumen. It really had nothing to do with the product. It was more about the ins and outs and the learnings and the education of it. And that could be solved, but it wasn't being solved, right? So when I decided to leave corporate, about 10 years ago, but 7 years ago when I started 37 Oaks, it was like, well, I have all this knowledge. It's all stuck up in here. And it's like, I felt like if I can get it out, then I could help these businesses that have the opportunity to not only grow personally, like as an entrepreneur, but to impact their communities. A lot of these business owners, when you look at the products that they're providing in their neighborhoods, there's not a lot of opportunity in those neighborhoods for customers to buy those products. Think about where the Targets and the Walmarts are. Yes, they're accessible, but when you look at right in the root of the community, oftentimes they're not there. So these entrepreneurs are producing these products for their community because they're in the community and that's where it stemmed from. And I'm like, I'm seeing this connection here and it's all starting to come together. It's like, if they had the education, if they had the application, how can they start to occupy the vacant storefronts in their communities? How can they start to hire people within the community? How can they start to generate tax dollars or create generational wealth? I mean, it's like, duh. For me, it was kind of like this duh moment. And I'm like, and then I started looking around and I didn't see what my vision was out there. I saw parts and pieces. I saw organizations maybe focusing on startups, like early startups. And then I saw organizations focusing on businesses that were ready to get like investment, like 500K. I'm like, we're looking at between 500 or $5,000 to maybe $250,000. Where's that industry specific language when it comes to retail for these entrepreneurs? I just didn't see it. And to me, it's like, duh, why isn't it out there? And I just felt like I could do it. And that's what kind of the genesis of 37 Oaks is.
I love that. And I'm thinking about, okay, so you're at corporate retail, Sharon, and you're getting this inspiration. And obviously you've been through a lot of iterations, but I'd love to hear about who was your first type of business you wanted to serve? Like, did you just roll up to some fair? I mean, I'm so curious.
I'm glad you asked that question, because when we see 37 Oaks now, not saying it's perfect, we have a long way to go, a lot of things to do, but it didn't start off like this. When I first left corporate, I did not know what I was doing. Just because you have a lot of industry knowledge and experience, it does not mean that you can translate that easily to an entrepreneurial journey. That is not the case. So I knew what I was good at, but I didn't know how to monetize it. I didn't know what my business model was. I didn't know who my customers were. I didn't know. So I just dove in, as I typically do with anything else with entrepreneurship. I really just dove in. I did a lot of testing and learning. I did a lot of rapid prototyping. I made a lot of mistakes. I totally undervalued a lot of my services in the beginning. I started off doing websites for really small businesses. It had nothing to do with everything we're talking about now, because I felt like one of the opportunities with businesses, in order to grow, you need to have some sort of presence out there that's beyond you, right? Your physical you. How do you get your word out there? So I started with that. I said, that's not where I want to go anymore. There's a lot of work with that, and it just wasn't what it was. But I got a lot of insights from it. I got a lot of feedback from it. I saw the needs, and I saw that businesses, they were just stuck, kind of like I was stuck in corporate. I kind of felt like I had so much more to offer, but in corporate, you kind of have to go through the chain of command, and there has to be a rec open for you to have this job. And it was like awesome company, but I feel kind of stuck, and I could relate to how they felt when they were in that stage. And I was like, let me see how I can use my resources, my network, my experience to create this space for them to actually excel. And over time, I mean, I've been through all type of iterations, and I just learned that where we are now is where we need to be for now. We'll grow, but.
Can you talk a little bit, just that quick fine point, and on turning your enthusiasm, intelligence, skill set into a business? Like, what was there's so many things people don't realize. I didn't realize about that at first. People don't realize that. They think it's the same thing about like being a teacher and knowing a subject. You can know physics really well, but teaching physics is a different thing. You can know, retailing really well, but teaching someone or helping someone retail and running a business to help someone retail, that's a different thing. Can you talk a little bit, like, was there a turning point where you said, okay, now I'm running a business doing this and not just sort of trying to figure out how to run the business? Was there a moment there, or could you just like touch that one again?
Yeah, I think the moment was when I was getting referrals and I didn't even realize I had something to get referrals on, to be honest with you, because again, I'm a big tester and learner. So I wasn't in the early stages committing to like, this is what we do, nothing else. So as I started to test and learn, put things out there, and I'm always iterating. So even if I get some feedback, we're always incorporating that into something and saying, okay, what's the next step or next version of this? And over time, I was like, we didn't have to iterate as much, right? We kind of found some sort of space with the customer, the feedback, the results. I was like, ooh, I think we might have something for a minute. And then over time, people were referring us to other people to do the same thing. And then even though I'm still collecting feedback, the core of what I was doing, or at that time it was there wasn't a team, but at that time, what I was doing, I was like, okay, now I know that I have something, because my iterations aren't as deep. They're not as intense. I'm just learning and incorporating some of that. And then the other thing is when I started to pitch my business, the feedback I was getting, people were saying, wow, I haven't seen this before. Or, what you're doing is very unique. I was like, wow, I guess it is. It was all like insight to me because again, I'm just going. I wasn't even thinking about everything else. I'm just doing what I do. And at that point I was like, okay, now I feel like I have something that I can invest in branding, invest in marketing, invest in people, invest in stuff like a little bit more than I had been. But again, for me, it's all about kind of having grace with yourself, kind of trusting what you do, what you know, what you believe, but then having grace with the process because it didn't happen overnight. I didn't have a business plan. I did a business model canvas, but I didn't do the business plan because I didn't know what I was planning or anything. It was really just, it was really just flexible. I would have liked that. Very flexible.
I've never asked you this, chicken and egg, e-commerce, e-commerce pathways or brick and mortar pathways. I don't remember. Is there one you headed down first? Do you find them to be yin and yang?
Good question. So when I first started doing, I'll say trainings and courses and education, it actually was on wholesale because that was the need. I've always had the experience with wholesale, of course, because corporate retail and of course brick and mortar and of course e-commerce through corporate retail, but I didn't understand what was needed until I got out there. So the request at first about 5-6 years ago was around understanding this whole world of wholesale because it's really mysterious, right? There's a lot of parts and pieces and nuances, and it's not easy to find that information. And of course I knew it. So I was like, let me just start here. And I started going down this path of creating a lot of different courses under wholesale because again, there's so many parts and pieces. But then I was like, okay, I don't want our business owners to be concentrated in one channel of distribution. I don't believe that. That's scary. Think about when COVID happened. Our business owners that were solely concentrated on brick and mortar, many of them were wiped out because they didn't have any type of online presence. So I was like, okay, let's look at diversifying a bit or different business models and channels and things like that. So then I went to e-commerce. And then of course, storefronts and everything else kind of came from that. So even though over the past couple of years, I think we're more so known for e-commerce, mostly because of COVID and a lot of the attention was on that. We started off with wholesale and then emerged into everything else.
Love that. So I'll take you back a little bit, and that's fantastic. That's exactly what we need to hear. So go back to, you start with websites, you realize you're kind of walking uphill. You're trying everything, you're rapid prototyping, you're iterating, and then it starts to feel like you're going downhill. People are starting to ask you for things, you're being pulled, you're requested instead of requesting. Talk about some of those first successes and failures once you're kind of in that mode of going downhill. So I'm assuming it hasn't all been downhill since, right? I mean, meaning all positive, there have been some
I'm
failures.
still doing it.
Yes, exactly.
Talk a little bit about those, even once you kind of, you start to find your product market fit, right? We call it that in kind of the startup world, like people are pulling from you instead of you pushing.
Yes.
Talk about some of those early successes and failures.
Yes. And I think that's a good question because when I first started, I didn't know what I was doing, right? So I was being pulled in all type of directions between websites, between doing business plans, between doing one-on-one training with businesses on operational retail stuff, between teaching classes. And I really feel like when businesses are in that stage, you kind of have to go with it a little bit. It's very intense. It's very exhausting. But I feel like that's the time where you're just like, you're just working hard. You got to roll up your sleeves and kind of suck it up because you get a lot of insights in terms of where you should go. I realized websites was not where I wanted to be. So let's nix that one. I realized business plans were good, but it wasn't an efficient model for me. It took a lot of time and it was an opportunity cost. I couldn't do other things with that. So although I can advise or consult, that's one thing, but I couldn't do them. And then what I ended up doing was I started working, at first I was working with business owners, like one-on-one, but again, that's not efficient. So I started to evolve to a model where I'm working with organizations that have groups of businesses and doing like group models and cohorts. And again, it was all just a test and learn, but I wouldn't be here if I didn't go through those tough exhausting, stressful times, inefficient times, may I add. But it helped me learn really where we fit, not just for our services and products, but from a business modeling perspective. So I'm all about, you got to go through to get through.
That's huge. I just want to plant there for 1 second. So can you talk a little bit about the time it took for that to happen? Because I think sometimes people don't recognize that you may be doing that. I don't know that you were, but you may be doing that in your business for years. And now that can go too far. That is an inefficient time, and that can go too far. It can run you out of energy, money, time, all sorts of things. But it is possible. And then you can like go through it in 3 months. And so
Yes.
sometimes people think you can do it always will do it in 10 days, and then you'll be running your business. Can you talk a little bit about the time, and then also like the opportunity cost? Because you could still be doing, it sounds like, some of the work that you maybe are doing a little bit of now, but maybe it's like a lucrative side hustle instead of your core business. Can you talk about like opportunity costs?
Yes. So the timing part, I wrote a book last October. It's called Prepare to Shift, and it's for entrepreneurs that I work with. And it's just for this purpose, because I wanted to outline some of the misconceptions about entrepreneurship. And there's a specific chapter I have in there where we talk about the microwave entrepreneur. Right now, in this generation, we have so much on Instagram and Facebook and TikTok, and sign up with me, you'll get $1 million in 3 days. And it's like, okay, possibly, right? I don't know the back end workings of those organizations, but highly unlikely, but possibly. But I think because we keep seeing these microwave entrepreneurs on social media and things, that when we think about starting a business, we don't understand everything that it entails. And we think it's easy. Now, if you want to be a hobby business, that's perfectly fine. It's very flexible. You don't have the same levers you have to pull if you want to have a sustainable business, right? So oftentimes it's like, part of what I do is I relax our entrepreneurs to say, it's okay that you're not making $1 million in 3 weeks, right? This is a process, and you have to invest in your business and yourself in order to get there. So I do talk a lot about the timing. And of course, the timing is going to be dependent on the resources you have, the time you have to invest in it, your skill set, your experience, what you're starting from, your team, if you have it. Like, there's a lot of factors in it. For me, I start the first, I'd say, so 37 Oaks is 7 years old. The first like 4 years, it was all me. Like, you would think I was an octopus or something. I had like all these like different tentacles, and they were like, how are you getting it done? Because I wasn't sleeping. That was my sacrifice, honestly. Like, because I didn't have the money, I didn't have the team, I had the experience, but a lot of things I either had to do on my own, or I had to learn how to do because I didn't know how to do. So I had to find like free software or something because I didn't have the money to do it. So you just have to invest. You have to use what you have to get over that hump. So what I started to do was, I realized that as I started to find my product market fit and use that to adjust my pricing and profitability and stuff like that, once I started to get profitability, I started to look at the tasks that I was doing on my own that I probably wasn't the most efficient in it, or I didn't like it. And it was like, okay, once I get some money, the first thing I'm going to do is find someone to do that task, because I'm spending too much time on it and I'm not efficient. And if I got someone to do that, then now I can focus on something else. But I didn't start off with having tens of $1,000s to just have a team. I had to first learn what it was I was inefficient with in order to find someone, or find the role or task that I needed someone to work with. So everything for me, honestly, was like organic learning. And it was, those first 4 years were rough, like really, really rough. And I'm a single mom too, full-time entrepreneur. So in my book, I talk about how if I didn't kill it, we didn't eat it. So at the end of the day, like, I have to work.
I'm buying this book today, by the way. Like all
On
these quotes.
Amazon.com. But no, it was just really it was a learning experience. So this is why I think I'm able to translate to the business owners I work with that language that we were talking about, because oftentimes they're going through or have gone through the same thing I have in some capacity. And it's like, we gotta be willing to just sacrifice at first, because if it's not given to us, we have to figure out how to take it, honestly. And that's what that ended up being for me.
I love that. And I heard somebody say, and I think I've said this to you before, Elle, maybe even in one of these, but like you have to burn something in a business. You have to burn time, money, or people, and sometimes the people is you. Sometimes it's like you said, like if it needs to be done, it needs to be done. And it sort of doesn't matter that I can't do it right now. I have to, or time, like if it takes too long to be able to do it. Maybe you wanted it to be a hobby forever, but maybe you want it to be a business. So you can't burn too much time, or money. Like, are you going to raise? And then are you going to, so there's so much interesting.
Interesting. Because in my book, I promise you, I did not know that. But in my book,
Yeah.
I see a chapter where it says, as a business owner for the ones I work with, they either have three, call it assets. It's either time, it's money, or I call it support. So sometimes you have people like your family or something that could do it for you. And I'm like, you got to pick one. Any, mini, money, mo. And at that time I had to pick time because I didn't have money. So that's interesting. I did not know that. That's very cool.
No, we need to put up the name of your book, by the way. What is the name of your book? I'll put it as a title.
We'll put like a
little slick. It's called Prepare to Shift.
Prepare to Shift. Okay. Yeah. You said that before. Okay, good. All right. I'll stop talking.
So one thing we're working together, Durand, on other projects. And one thing we have worked on is like the product market fit, how you're messaging, who you're serving. And so we have talked about your iteration and your prototyping to get to product market fit. But when we think about like this, what I love is this one more store being more of an omni-channel of like, you can sell in one more store, you could be one more store, you could be like online. And how do you know someone is like at that point? How are you qualifying the people you work with? Because we spent like an hour trying to like just talk about that. And the word entrepreneur is really big. Like, so how do you hone in on the messaging to kind of recruit who you're working with?
For the business owners, for the small
like how do you know they're ready, or like what's the right timing for you?
So what I've learned is that again, iterations, that the business owner that we best serve is the business owner that's in the late startup phase. We don't work with businesses that are just starting up, that have a concept idea, that haven't tested anything in the market. They may not have it all together, but at least they have a prototype. They have something that they're selling. They may have sold a few items on Facebook or something, or maybe did one pop-up or something, but they have gone through some sort of sales process to know that they're stuck, that they're not moving at the rate that they want to. So early stage startup, that's not really us. We need someone who's gone through something to know that they want to take their business to the next level, but they don't have it in themselves to do it. They need some support. So oftentimes that's what I look at. I don't often look at the revenue number. I think that's used quite a bit, which is fine in some cases, but I've seen businesses that have excelled very fast, and they maybe started off with like $1,000 when I met them, right? So it doesn't necessarily indicate their potential based on the sales numbers when they first come into 37 Oaks. So I don't really utilize that information that much, but I more so look at, number one, the product, like if they've invested in some form or fashion, but then also their mindset. This is a big one. This is a big one, their mindset. Part of what I like to do in early coaching stages is just find out, do they want to be a hobby business or a lifestyle business, or are they looking to really be sustainable? Either way is perfectly fine, but we're with the businesses that are looking to ideally have their business go beyond them, right? Whatever that looks like, whether they want to get acquired, sold, pass it down to family members, whether they want to grow beyond their block is another thing that we want to help businesses do. It's totally okay with being a neighborhood business, but we have a world out there of potential customers. So the mindset, I think, is the most important thing, because once this is done, everything else follows. So a lot of that does come from that initial conversation of just seeing where they are with that.
By the way, I'm hoping you haven't trademarked beyond their block, because I'm going to rush to do that right now.
I might beat you to it now.
I know it's a race at this point. No, that's great. Go ahead, Ella. Yeah,
I know, excited. We're supposed to be alternating, but we're just excited. Another thing I feel like I joke, Adam, I've learned the 37 Oaks presence in Chicago. It's like underneath all these chambers of commerce. It's really appeared to me that you have a lot of partnerships with different business service organizations who serve, like you said, like starting that small business. How do you manage that nuance of like what you're offering like, do you see differences with those organizations and how you're adding value there? Because I think what you're doing is very unique, but I'd be curious at how it seems like very diplomatic, like, you know, you're adding
Yeah.
something that I think people have never seen.
No, that's a great point. And all of the organizations that we work with, especially the business support ones, we tend to, okay, so I'll like give an example. With like Chamber of Commerce's or like maybe accelerators and things like that. Oftentimes what they're doing is they're giving the education around starting the business and those very generic, general business practices, like how to, you know, open a bank account, or, you know, how to set up your LLC or S Corp, or how to just generally understand the financial language. Typically what they're not doing is having that retail commerce and distribution specific language. We're like a trade, right? Like when you go to college, for example, the first 2 years are generic, general, kind of like basic classes, but eventually you declare a major. You go into business, you go into astronomy, you go into engineering. We're kind of like those last 2 years of college into graduate degree. So we're very specific on what we're doing. It's not general business. So typically the organizations we work with, those business owners will go through those basic classes of business ownership. So once they declare their major, that's when they come into 37 Oaks. So it's very like, it's like complementary to what they're doing. It's like the next phase of it. So no, and that's why I think we've been able to work with so many of them, because they're not offering this, but they have so many businesses that need that language, that industry specific information.
Yeah, and I do find that fascinating, by the way, Elle, as well, because that is hard to do, especially sometimes in a place like Chicago. I love Chicago, but Chicago has its own, you know, like a lot of cities, there are lots of fiefdoms, right? So if you're able to cross fiefdoms, you're doing something really impressive. How have you found that, like, were you intentional about not being competitive in that sense, or was it just this is what you brought in and they needed it and so it worked?
Yeah, this is just what we do. A lot of it came from my background and experience. Like, I don't want to teach people about their legal structure or like, and I'm very, even right now, when you look at our courses, there's nothing really generic. There may be a few that kind of cross over a bit because it's more of a bridge. But when you look at our whole suite of classes, they're all about distribution, e-commerce, wholesale, even the strategy and operational things. For example, cost of goods. We have a cost of goods class, but it's really specific to tangible businesses that have tangible products that are going into wholesale or retail or something like that. So of course, there's going to be a generic cost of goods class, but we're adding on that industry specific layer. So no, I've never really been in that general business field because that wasn't really where I feel like my value was or interest was.
I also don't want to not highlight some of the more like amazing tactical things that 37 Oaks does. So I'd love to also, you know, you have your classes and you said it's like a trade, but just like the hands-on practice, I don't think we do enough simulation in any of this, right? You go to these classes and you're like, make a website. And that's why you and I met, because I was like, well, what if they walk away and they're like, I literally can't, I don't know who to call. So again, I love your, I'd love to talk about your kind of simulation of e-commerce.
Yes.
And kind of like the warehousing that you've done, because I think you've just taken it to another level, right? Because like, so talk to us about kind of like that practicum you've kind of incorporated.
Yes, and this was a part of the testing and learning. As I was working with a lot of entrepreneurs, I started off with more of the educational side, the classes and the workshops, which I thought was awesome. But I'm like, okay, to your point, Elle, we're teaching and they have the concepts and they're starting to apply them, but then it's like, well, bye. And I'm like, no, wait a minute, because there wasn't a place for them to kind of plant themselves into the application. So probably about 3 years ago, we came up with the actual formal concept of 37 Oaks University. So these are all of our classes, and this is like our learning platform. But then I'm like, we need an application platform. We need a place for these businesses to actually apply the learnings from the university, from the coaching, from everything that we've taught them and educated them on. They need a place to kind of play around that's a little bit controlled, right? So that they have the support of mentors, they have the tools, they're able to get that education but also that application. So that's where our Saucony platform came about. And under Saucony, we look at it again as our learning laboratory, our sandbox. So the businesses will take their learnings either from our e-commerce curriculums or our, call it physical curriculums, whether it's wholesale, storefronts, and then they have a place to plant them. So our e-commerce marketplace, it's not Amazon, it's not Etsy. I'm not trying to do that, at least right now. I never know how things evolve, but right now I'm not trying to be Amazon or Etsy. I'm trying to have a place for these businesses to learn how to market their products, learn how to understand data to see what it is that's going to work in their business. So after they leave their program, they already have a roadmap. They know what's going to work, what's not going to work. So on the back end of our programming, we have a warehouse and fulfillment center where they don't have to worry about shipping the products, storing the product, customer service. Like, we're doing all of that back end kind of heavy lifting. They know about it. They're getting taught these things, but in terms of doing it, I want them to focus on the learning, the education, the marketing aspect of it, and the application of it. So that was when our Saucony platform came about. I was like, this is it. Like, this is what they need to apply the learnings.
Yeah, Adam, we're gonna get you one in Baltimore too.
Sold, by the way. We need one.
Absolutely. So that's where I'm totally, everything we do, any programming I try to do, a lot of it does start off with the education, but anytime we could throw the Saucony side in there, the application, that's what I want to do. Before COVID, we actually had a physical version of our marketplace. So right now we focus on the e-commerce marketplace because that's where we are, but we would take vacant storefronts and we would repurpose them into, call it retail wonderland. So that's what I call it. So on the outside, the customer is going in there, they're shopping, they're experiencing all these brands, but on the back end, our business owners are learning about merchandising techniques, they're learning about promotional strategies and the financial impacts of that. They're learning about customer service, operations, all the things that they're going to need to know to either go into wholesale or open up a storefront without the investment of it. So we kind of pulled back with that, of course, when COVID hit, but we'll probably start to bring that back because it's necessary now.